Put those hands together and welcome your First Lady, Miss Joni Parsley.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Valor. Fist held high, standing outside of your inside. So that's why we wear those bracelets, to let everybody know that we're standing outside of the inside. We're different, and we're not afraid to be different. But you can be seated. Thank you. Remnant, when we had our little talk, you brought it tonight, and it was amazing. And when they did it the first time, it was because I was really doing a message on the song, The Outsiders. And it's, well, they know now, but it's a little known fact that I'm a big fan of all kinds of music. I love almost all kinds of music. But I've grew up in the 60s and 70s during the Motown era, so I especially like R&B, and I grew up with, the Temptations, the Jackson 5, the OJs, the Spinners, the Ohio Players. Who else? And the Ohio Players, I always hid the album covers from my dad because he didn't like those. So I always put them inside something else. But just all the Motown people, I just, that was, I don't know, I just loved that. So naturally, I transitioned into, lots of pop music naturally when I was in high school. And there was a time when I was little, I was convinced I would marry Donny Osmond if he met me. I just knew it. Ushers, there's a man on the front row that is causing a bit of a disturbance. If you could do something about him. So I always got to steal the show. Anyway, I did want to marry Donny Osmond, but I even had and I had the purple socks and everything, but that was probably, other than maybe Elton John, the only probably white people I listened to back in the day. But there were no, that was before there was the Christian Jesus movement, and we had people like Keith Green and some of those people that I can't even remember now. All the kumbaya stuff, and we are one in the Spirit, we are one in the Lord, but it was great. I loved it. I loved growing up in the Jesus movement because that's where I learned to witness, and they made you do it too. When you were in youth group, you went out to the mall with tracts, and you were going to witness regardless, and I was always just scared to pieces, but it was still a real experience. But why I always pray about what I'm going to share, and I don't know why, Pastor will throw out a date and say, will you do April 19th? And I don't know why I always say, oh, okay. And then I like, why do I do that? Because I always say, I'm not a speaker, but God gives us opportunities to share our stories, and we're all storytellers. We're all storytellers. Everybody here has a story to tell. And so my heart, when I do share, is to always bring, I hope and pray, a word of encouragement to uplift the saints of God, because I know that if you knelt at an altar at some point in your life, you are going to be a target and you're fighting a battle and you're suffering and hurting in some way. Either, what was it that Lecrae said the other night? He said, you're either coming out of suffering, going into suffering, or something else, I forget. But it was good. Either coming out of suffering, going into suffering, or currently in suffering, yeah. So anyway, it all started then. When hip hop and rap came out, I love poetry, and the reason I love poetry, besides loving books and being an English major and all of that, but I've always loved poetry because I love the fact that there's a rhythm and a cadence, and other than the rhyming, and some is free verse and there's no rhyme to it, but I've always loved the cadence and just the beauty that people can put in just a few words. In a book you have pages and chapters, but in poetry you have verses and just a few sentences to put meaning into something, especially if you make it rhyme. So I started liking some of the old school rap when it was about social injustice, and now it's about women and money and whatever that fancy champagne is. I don't know what it's called, Patron or something, I don't know, or it's kind of most of it's junk and trash, and you should listen to it. But there is some Christian rap out there, and I always thought, oh, Christian rap, okay, because usually a lot of the Christian stuff is 10 years behind the times, but I got a hold of, my nephew Matt said, you've got to hear this guy Lecrae. So I listened to him, and what I fell in love with was, he's really good, and that was who you heard. But he says, the lyrical content is what I really loved, because he says some things that really changed my heart. And that's just a phrase that we overuse when we say, oh, something changed my life. Well, I don't always say that, because rarely things will change your whole life, but they'll change your heart, which will trickle down and change your behavior and your way of looking at something. So anyway, I just loved some of the things that he said, and Outsiders was one of them, because I've always felt a little, I always say, Ashton says I'm weird, but I always feel a little left of center, because I never really quite fit into the pastor's wife mold. I just never fit into any of the stuff in ministry, really. And my thinking was always a little left of center, and kind of, and I don't want to say in any way rebellious, but left of center is good enough. So, but I've always felt like you should be who you are, and who you are and who God made you is good enough. And you blaze your own trail with Him leading the way, and you don't have to follow anybody else's footsteps in the way that they did it or the way they think that you should do it. And what I prayed about is, what should I share? I'm trying to think of stuff, and nothing was coming to me, but excuse me. But I was walking down my hallway, and we have this mirror, and it has a crack in it. And every time somebody goes by that mirror, they always tell me, you have a crack in that mirror. Like I've never seen it. And I always say, I know, I bought it that way. Not just because it was a lot cheaper, but because I really liked the fact that it was imperfect. And I just loved the imperfection of that mirror having that crack in it. And I like imperfection in things. I don't want something that's produced and manufactured, and everything looks alike. And I like difference. That's why I love this church, because of the diversity. And so I like anything that has a flaw in it is something that, I'm personally drawn to. So I even had Ashton, and everyone in my family knows this, so Ashton gave me a cup last year, and it's a little antique, and it says mother, but it's got a crack in it. And I think that, it's flawed and imperfect, just like me. So it's the perfect example of imperfections and flaws. But what happens all too often, and why I had the kids do that was because of the masks. And when we're trying so hard to be an insider, we put masks on. Because we want to hide our imperfections, and we want to hide our flaws, because we're so trying to please somebody, or we're so trying to fit in. And so we put those masks on to hide our imperfections. Just like we do our makeup. If I would take my makeup off, you would see lots of flaws and imperfections. So, that's one mask I'm not giving up, but I'll give up all the others. A little more vanity, I guess. But God's love is so precious, and I'm learning so much more about how precious he sees us as his children, that when you're a parent, you'll notice your kids have flaws, but you can overlook those for the greater good. And we can be taught. I'm not talking about major character flaws like bad tempers or, whatever, or lying or cheating or stealing and all of the things of the old flesh. I'm talking about born again people who have flaws. We have not all arrived, and that's why we're still imperfect. And Jesus came for the perfecting of the saints. He didn't say, I'm coming so you'll be perfect. And I was saying that to someone, and they said, well, what do you do with the scripture, be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect? And I said, what I think that means is, I think that means love. I think he's not talking about, yes, we should strive for his character. Yes, we should strive for his holiness. Yes, we should strive for his mode of behavior. But most of all, we should strive for God is. And God is perfect love. Perfect love. It is not a feature. It is a fact. His love is not a feature. It is a fact. His love is our foundation. And everything from that foundation then becomes our formation. Everything from the love of that love and that foundation becomes our formation. That's the outgrowth. That's the fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit is love. Everything else is just an outgrowth of that love. It's a characteristic of that love. And so that love is so precious. And if we can really grasp that through our imperfections, he still loves us, and how deeply wounded we might be or deeply scarred on the inside or the outside, it doesn't matter, because he is a healer. His love caused him to be a healer. His love caused him to send his son to die so that we could be healed, so we could be whole. That's his kind of love. And in our imperfections, it has so become a stumbling block for all of us, because we put on a mask to please someone, We take it off to please someone. We put on a mask because we think we have to act a certain way. We, my God, don't even get me started in ministry because there's a lot of masks there. And you got to act a certain way. And I'm not talking about, we should always be appropriate, not inappropriate, not be a total rebel. I'm not going to go to a ministry event in goth wear, and say, I'm not, I'm in goth and have my nose pierced and stuff and black nail polish and, be that kind of a rebel. But what I don't need to do is wear a mask to fit in and be like everybody else and say what everybody else does and act how everybody else acts and be rude when other people are rude I'll stop there. I'm not always. There are great preachers, and I'm not saying that. I'm not being disrespectful of ministers at all. But I have often said, I will never know why God called me to this, other than because I guess He knew I was weird or different. But I have always said, I do not like the ministry, quote, unquote, but I love the work of the gospel. And there's a big difference. And unfortunately, in the 90s, when ministry became almost like a celebrity thing, we lost sight of the work of the gospel. We lost sight of the fact that all of us are the least of these. We became, so-and-so was, you had to carry have an entourage and a Louis Vuitton briefcase and purse and an entourage of 20 people, and you were somebody. And yet we're all the same. We're all the least of these. And the reason I studied that word, and I'm not going to give word studies because I know pastors doing a lot of that right now. But sometime I really do want to talk about the word that has really become the theme of my life, and it's Anawim. And in the biblical era, Anawim was a Hebrew word that meant the least of these, the poor, the utterly dependent. And it was because they were utterly dependent on other people for food, for clothing, for anything, for work, for anything at all. They were utterly dependent. And so now that translates to us. The least of these, when we talk about the least of these, and when we get to heaven and He says, well done, thou good and faithful servant, He doesn't say, well done, thou good and faithful preacher or singer or whatever they're all, teacher, prophet, apostle, bishop, or whatever. He says, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Because that's what Jesus came as, a servant to man. And so Anawim means the least of these, the utterly dependent. And that is all of us. There's not one person, I don't care if you preach to 20 zillion people, you're still one of the least of these, because who of us is not utterly dependent on God? Utterly. And so when we talk about, and yet we still have the scripture where we are to take care of one another. And the reason is because there's no status, and we're to take care of the least of these because we're all the least of these. And yes, we should love the people that are in need and poor or sick or in the hospital or in the prisons. Yes, that's our ministry, because that is our brother and that is our sister, and we are alike. they're not different than us or lower than us because they're in prison or because we don't know. And love seeks to understand. And one of the things that we miss is in love is that, and this took me a long time to learn this lesson, because I never could understand why God would ask me to pray for my enemies. And I thought for a long time, well, I know that what you sow, you reap. And I know that I should pray that they're, that's a universal law regardless. I mean, there are a lot of people who sow and reap and aren't Christians. I mean, you sow, you reap. You sow to the wind, you can reap the whirlwind, and good and bad. I could never understand why he would want me to pray for my enemies. And then I began to really, pray about that. And begin to think about prayer. And prayer, when we're in our time of prayer, or if you're like me, I just talk all the time. I don't know that I do have some prayer time, but I'm always like talking to God. And I have an inner dialogue and outer dialogue. And I was in the store talking the other day, and in a store, like talking to him under my breath, and some lady was looking at me really strange and strangely, but I guess that's why he tells us to pray without ceasing because we're in constant communion with him then. And when we are in prayer, there's a few things that happen. Number one, we realize our position. We realize that he is higher than us, that his ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are much better than ours. His direction is where we need to go. We can't win any kind of argument that's in that word, because that word is truth and that word is life and breath, and that is what he left us. But another thing happens, and prayer is a time where I don't care who you are or what you do, but if you're praying and seriously praying, you will bow your head. And there is a humility that comes with that. There is a humility that comes when you realize your position and his position. And when that happens, you begin to soften. And that communion of love begins to take place. And so if you're praying for an enemy, then you can seek to understand. And God showed me that many years ago, because when everybody's got difficult people in their lives. I mean, in work, friendships, family, coworkers, every day, or some strangers you'll encounter can be difficult. And if you seek to understand instead of just get angry and judge, which I'm not saying I have never done, but get angry and judge and make assumptions, then it's hard to get into bitterness and unforgiveness and all of those things, because we haven't taken the time to pray and seek and understand people that are. I'm getting distracted by the front row again. Sorry, I didn't know what you guys were talking about. But am I over time? Okay. So anyway, I'm not going to get through like a lot of this, but I remember specifically somebody that God really gave me an insight into, and it was somebody that worked on staff here years ago, and I don't know, I'll just say it. I didn't like this person. I mean, I just didn't like him. And it wasn't because of anything that he did to me, but it was because of things that I watched him do to others. He was condescending, he was rude, he was mean, and I just didn't care for him. And so I don't have a bad temper, but when I really do tilt, like I do tilt. Like once I'm there, I'm just there. Okay, so I go for broke, and so what happened one day was I got a call that someone had he was very upset because someone had parked in his parking spot, and it happened to be a person that had a handicap, and so somebody called me and told me about that in the office, and especially if it's somebody with a disability, I get I just go bonkers. So I was just so incensed and so angry, and so I thought, okay, all these people bring gifts to my husband a lot during camp meeting and things, and when they come and they give him really nice hunting knives, and I thought, I'm going to go slash this guy's tires because he made this woman move and she had to walk and she has a disability, and I'm thinking, I'm getting a knife, I'm going to go slash his tires. So, I'm hunting around for the knives, and there's lots of them, but so I had my partners in crime, and we were going to head out there, but we thought, okay, we're going to get caught, and he'll call the police. And he's the type that'll call the police. So then, I'm thinking, okay, what we'll do is come back tonight. This is a true story. And we'll get all the orange cones in the parking lot, and we'll circle them around his parking spot, and then we'll get police tape, and we'll put that around, then we'll get chalk and make a dead body outline, and it's really ugly, but so I was just that incensed about the injustice of making someone who had a disability move their car just because they were in his spot. And so anyway, one of many times, but one day he came to the back parking lot in tears and just crying profusely, and had his arms extended and just fell into Pastor's arms, and my whole heart changed. And I thought, okay, now I get it. Now I get why the cover-up. Now I get why the mask. Now I understand why the behavior. And all of a sudden, my heart of compassion went out to him because I understood. And so many times we react and we do things, we say things, we think things when we don't stop to think about what has that person went through, what have they been through. And then I heard a little bit of his story, and it all made perfect sense. It didn't make what he did right, but it made sense, and it made me understand and be able to pray for him, who at one time was my enemy. I was going to slash his tires, so that probably qualifies pretty much as an enemy, I guess. And so I just, almost kicked that. So I just, from that point forward, just looked at him with a heart of compassion, and sought to talk to him and sought him out, and it's just an example. It's just one of many examples, but we have flaws and imperfections for many, many reasons, and some of them are just because we're human, And some of them are because we're very wounded. And the thing about wounds, and this is something that, somebody told me, they were arguing about one time with me and said, you've got to quit saying that scars are a representation of God's grace and all of this. And, God heals scars too. And I said, well, didn't he appear and Thomas wanted to see proof of his scars? And one of the things that they were talking about at the concert that night was that our scars, whether they're inside or outside, are proof that we had wounds and that God's love healed those wounds. God's healing healed those wounds. And that those imperfections and flaws aren't something to disregard. They tell a story, and it's something that we don't have to mask or cover up or try to change the way we behave because we've been hurt and we've been deeply hurt. And most of us sitting in here at one time or another, who can sit there and raise your hand if someone in your life, somewhere along the line from birth to now, has caused you, because no one can make you feel anything, but has caused you to look at yourself and feel inferior and not good enough. I can do that. And we can almost all say that because we internalize what people say, because words are so powerful. And so we can internalize those words. And like I said, the time I was talking about, I am the captain now. We don't have to accept what people say. We accept what God's truth and his love says about us. And what people think, we don't have to take that in. We don't have to accept it and receive it. We accepted Jesus. We accepted his truth. And his truth is the only truth we really, really, really need. And I want to read a couple things that because I know it's time to go here in a bit. But there's a book that I read called The Spirituality of Imperfection, and it's called Storytelling and the Search for Meaning. But it said, however we come to understand that there are necessarily both ups and downs in life, the same perspective reveals that within ourselves there is light within our darkness and good within our evil. In the spirituality of imperfection, we learn to accept that we are neither angel nor beast, for we are both. Everyone must have two pockets so that he can reach into one or the other according to his needs. In his right pocket are to be the words, "For my sake was the world created," and in the other pocket, "I am earth and ashes." And I just thought that was really powerful because it sort of, once again, gives us a perspective that we are Anawim, we are the least of these. And I won't go into some of the scriptures now that I wanted to read, but there's a beautiful, let me go to, in Pastor's book, and I was actually the one that was reading this book and gave this to him, but so I'm taking credit. But in The Furious Longing of God by Brennan Manning, which everyone should read. But there is such a beautiful example of what I'm talking about. And I'm just going to go into some parts of it. St. John of the Cross said it will never ever be given to any human heart to understand the depth of desolation, utter abandonment, indescribable loneliness, and complete forsakenness that lay behind Jesus' cry. But even in that cry, there is no indication that Jesus ever lost trust or hope or confidence in his Abba. After 35 years of praying over the passion and death narratives in Luke's gospel, French biblical scholar Pierre Benoit believed that the Abba of Jesus spoke to his son as he hung naked, nailed to the wood, with spit dripping into his face, his body bathed in blood. And Benoit believes the words Abba spoke were words from the Hebrew scripture Song of Songs, 2:10 through 14. I don't know if I'll get through this without crying. Come now, my love, my lovely one, come. For you the winter has passed, the snows are over and gone, the flowers appear in the land, the season of joyful songs has come. The cooing of the turtle dove is heard in our land. Come now, my love, my lovely one, come. Let me see your face and let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet and your face is beautiful. Come now, my love, my lovely one, come. Abba was calling Jesus home to an intimacy of life and love that defied description, a home where every tear is wiped away, where there is no more mourning, no more sadness. And Jesus seems to hear the voice of his Abba because of his last word on the cross is a response from the powerful, profound intimacy of his own heart when he cries, Abba, I'm coming home. Into your hands I commend my spirit. Into your heart I commend my heart. Abba, it's finished, consummated, I'm coming home. And all of us are going to get the chance to say that. And all of us are going to get the chance to hear him say that to us. And what's beautiful is right before Brennan Manning died, which was on my bucket list of the number one thing I wanted to do was meet him before he passed away. But he passed away, I think, 2 years ago. And there's actually a video of him, and he had Parkinson's and he can barely speak, but he was saying just those words, come now, my lovely one, come. But he was such an amazing example of a life truly, truly given to the gospel when he could have been preaching. I mean, he's a brilliant writer, a brilliant speaker. He could have been preaching to tens of thousands, I'm sure. But he went to New Orleans and he found the only leper colony in the United States. I didn't even know leprosy was still a disease in this day and age, but he found one in Louisiana, and he'd been there many times. And he said in the book, I go from room to room visiting the lepers, victims of Hansen's disease. On one occasion, I was coming up from the front steps. A nurse came running toward me and said, Brennan, can you come quick and pray with Yolanda? She's dying. I always carry the holy oils with me to anoint any who desire it. I went up to Yolanda's room and sat on the edge of the bed. She was 37 years old. 5 years ago, before the leprosy began to ravage, she must have been one of the most stunningly beautiful creatures God ever made. And he goes on to talk about her physical beauty. But then he says, but that was then. Now her nose is pressed into her face, her mouth is severely contorted, both ears are distended. She has no fingers on either hand, just two little stumps. One of the first effects of leprosy is losing all sensitivity in your extremities, toes and fingers. A leper can rest her hand on a burning hot stove and feel absolutely nothing, which often leads to gangrene and eventually demands amputation. 2 years earlier, her husband divorced her because of the social stigma and forbidden her 2 sons to see her. The boys were terrified, and then he talks about that. And then quotes a poet that says, those doves below, the ones utterly cared for, never endangered ones, cannot know tenderness. He anointed Yolanda with oil and prayed with her, and he said, as I turned around to put the top back on the bottle of oil. The room was filled with a brilliant light. It had been raining when I came in. I didn't even look up, but she said, "Thanks, Abba, for the sunshine." I said, "Thanks, Abba, I bet that will cheer her up." As I turned to look at Yolanda, "If I live to be 300 years old," he said, "I'll never be able to find the words to describe what I saw." Her face was like a sunburst over the mountains, like 1,000 sunbeams streaming out of her face, literally so brilliant I had to shield my eyes. I said, "Yolanda, you appear to be very happy." With her slight Mexican-American accent, she said, "Oh, Father, I am so happy." And he said, "Will you tell me why?" And she said, "Yes, the Abba of Jesus just told me that he would take me home today." I vividly remember the hot tears that began rolling down my cheeks. After a lengthy pause, I asked what the Abba of Jesus said. Now, and I'm going to say it again, but there's a real important thing at the very end of this. It's just a killer. Yolanda said, "Come now, my love, my lovely one, come. For you, the winter has passed. The snows are over and gone. The flowers appear in the land. The season of joyful songs has come. The cooing of the turtle dove is heard in our land. Come now, my love, my lovely one, come. Let me see your face and let me hear your voice. For your voice is sweet and your face is beautiful. Come now, my love, my lovely one, come." 6 hours later, her little body was swept into the furious love of her Abba. Later that day, I learned from the staff that Yolanda was illiterate. She had never read the Bible, or any book for that matter, in her entire life, so she did not recite those words from the Bible. She actually heard Abba calling her. I surely had never repeated those words to her in any of my visits, and I was, as they say, a man undone. And I just think that furious love of God is here for each and every one of us to say that our winter has passed. There will be that time when he will say, we're still in this world and we can still work through it. And we can work through it especially when we walk in the God kind of love that gives us patience and understanding for all people. And that we look upon ourselves as the least of these, as no better than anyone else. That our only, as Lecrae said, and I told the kids, our only competition, he says, my only competition is me. We don't have to compete with anybody else. Our only competition is ourselves, to be like our Lord Jesus Christ, as Pastor said today. And we will still have mountains, we will still have wounds, and we will still have scars to prove God's grace and how gracious his love is. But know one day that he's going to say, you're coming home today. And we have to live our lives worthy to get that call. And the only way we can do that is to walk in the true and perfect love of God and forgiveness, no matter what anyone has done, no matter what mask you're wearing because you've been scarred on the inside and you're trying to put on a happy face because you've been so deeply wounded. It doesn't and can't matter, because you have a Father that loves like no other. And know, as much as I love my kids, and I would take a bullet in 2 seconds, there's no comparison, my love to his love for them. And there's a I can't find it, and I don't want to wrestle around with papers, but there is a beautiful line from a movie that says, sometimes it's the people no one imagines anything of who do the things no one can imagine. And because we think everybody should be like us or like someone normal, which I do not like the word normal, and we judge one another and we look at each other and say, in all honesty, we can say, well, we're better than that. We're better than that behavior, or we're better than acting like that. We're still judgmental. And that is the kind of behavior in God's love in 1 Corinthians 13 and all throughout the Bible is talking about his love. And I just have to talk about, imagine when he, I always loved the scripture in John when the scribes and Pharisees brought the woman in adultery. And I'm sure they thought Jesus was just going to have a time with her and call her every name in the book. And he writes in the sand with his finger and says, which of you have never sinned? And that's basically our message. We can't throw any stones if we haven't. And if none of us here have sinned, we wouldn't be here. We would have been translated, I'm supposing. So I guess none of us are perfect yet. And but we are being perfected, and perfected most in love, because again, that is our foundation, and from that becomes our formation. But 1 John 1:5, and I close with this, and this is the message of promise, which we have heard from him and now are reporting to you. God is light, and there is no darkness in him at all. No, not in any way. All who keep his commandments, who obey his orders and follow his plan, live and continue to live, to stay and abide in him, and he in them, in that communion, they let Christ be a home to them. And they are the home of Christ. That's so powerful. They let Christ be a home to them, and they are the home of Christ. And by this we know and understand and have the proof that he really lives and makes his home in us by the Holy Spirit whom he has given us. And we're the only proof this world has. We're it. We're it. We're it. Jesus is not going to come in physical form and walk down the street and say, I am Jesus. He sent his Spirit, and we are his home, and he is our home. And because of that, we have to be the proof of his undying, undeniable love, so that the world can see that there's something better than what they have, that there's something worth trading, that there's something for those wounded hearts and wounded warriors and hearts that are searching, those vagabond hearts. There's something for them, and we are them. We are them. And we have to continue to work, to love, even when it's difficult, and it sometimes is very challenging. But we pray, and we ask God to soften our hearts toward the people that are difficult, and to pray that they are blessed. Somebody told me that if you will pray that that person is blessed, it will take a lot of that anger away. that that person is blessed and they have all that they need, it will take a lot of that anger away. And I could just go on and on and on because I love to talk about the love of God. But I will just close and say I will be waiting for the day when he says, it's my turn now. And it's my turn now. And I'll get to leave the winter of this life behind for the beauty of heaven. And that eternity, we can't even comprehend in our human mind, will belong to us. And it will belong to everyone sitting here, regardless of what scars you have, what masks you've worn, what things you've tried to hide. He knows it all. And he's just saying, come now, my lovely one, come. Winter has passed. It can pass in this life too. He can still give us joy for mourning. He is a God of exchange. And his greatest exchange is his exchange of his life and most definitely his love.